Welcome to First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, the birthplace of Congregational Humanism. We carry on that tradition of free thought today, dedicated to promoting a free search for truth, meaning, and justice. Our web address is firstunitarian.org. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Those were the fabulous sounds of OK Factor. So welcome to First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis. Today is Sunday, October 20th, 2024. First Unitarian Society is a member congregation of the Unitarian Universalist Association of Congregations. Our programming is in person, live online, and on demand 24/7. My name is Mickey Morissette. I've been a congregant here for about 10 years, and I'm part of the team that's supporting our interim minister this year. So today's special guest I will be introducing is Marlene Johnson, and of course our guest musicians, OK Factor. If you are comfortable, please turn to the people near you and offer a few words of welcome. So welcome everyone to this place of love and justice, where we attempt to live up to humanity's highest ideals and highest hopes. Thank you for being here with us today. Each week when we gather, we light our chalice, and together we repeat one of our FUS aspirations or one of our UU values. Today we're having the value of transformation. Okay, the words are on the screen. We adapt to the changing world. We covenant to collectively transform and grow spiritually and ethically. Openness to change is fundamental to our Unitarian and Universalist heritages. Never complete and never perfect. If you would stand for the Congregational Covenant. Love is the spirit of this place, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
Please rise as you are able and join us in singing, stay standing. Please rise as you're able and join us in singing number 110 in the teal hymnal, and we will also have the lyrics on the stand.
Good morning. I'm Claire Nyquist, and I'm here as a member of our Congregational Care Team. First Unitarian Society is a congregational humanist community. We are here for each other, our neighbors, and the planet. When we gather on Sundays, we take a few moments to reflect on the human experience, the joys, the concerns, and the milestones. We do this to stay in touch with our own humanity and to remind ourselves of the value of a moment of stillness. Ruth Agar welcomed 2 new additions to the human race on October 10th. Her great-grandchildren, Nico Jackson and Luco Frank. They are doing well but remain in the hospital. Mom is home in South Minneapolis. Congratulations, and may they be able to go home soon. L'Oreal Roballo Castor has shared the good news that the Castors are expecting their second baby. Please consider stopping by the table downstairs to send a note to folks who are unable to attend assembly and people we have mentioned in joys and concerns. Now we take a few moments to reflect on those who are suffering and that all may find ways to comfort them and work for justice.
So as many of you know, I'm the publisher and editor of Minnesota Women's Press magazine. It's the longest continuously run feminist publication in the country. It started in 1985 because women's leadership and issues tended to be relegated only to the lifestyle pages. The co-founders wanted to change that. It's not been easy to keep it alive, especially these days when print publications everywhere are losing money because of advertising lost to the internet. But thanks in part to some of the congregants here and other loyal readers and advertisers, we're hoping to make it to our 40th anniversary in April, right here. So a few years ago, we compiled some of the stories from 35 years of coverage into a book. And a chapter in here was about political leadership. We noted that in the 1980s, a coalition formed in Minnesota to aim for 50% representation of women in political leadership. A women's caucus in 1986 said there were 4 central issues that its candidates needed to support: abortion rights, passage of the Equal Rights Amendment, government-funded daycare, and pay equity. So that was nearly 40 years ago. And currently, as we know, those 4 issues are still not in great shape, statewide or nationally. Future Texas Governor Ann Richards attended the National Political Caucus in St. Paul in 1989 and said, "Until we raise our children to respect equal rights, you will not really see the societal changes that are necessary to gain full equality." Today, Minnesota has 77 women in the state legislature, which is the highest number ever, and it represents 38% of the representatives. So we're also one of 18 states that thus far has not had a female governor. One of the interviews I had the privilege to do with recently was with Marlene Johnson, Minnesota's first female lieutenant governor, who worked alongside Governor Rudy Perpich. She is our special guest today, visiting after 2 decades living in Washington, D.C. She's in Minnesota to talk about her new book, Rise to the Challenge, a memoir of politics, leadership, and love. It will be available in the social hall downstairs afterwards for book purchases, signing, and then they'll have a little Q&A with her as well. Back in 1986, Minnesota Women's Press founder Molly Hoban interviewed Marlene and asked what changes and growth she had experienced. She talked about an outward-bound journey she had taken years earlier, which involved both teamwork and personal challenges. She said it reminded her how much everyone, including adults, need to have people believe in you. She also said, "I believe that the sharing of power is so basic that it will make the difference in the world. If we focus on electing more women and appointing more women and sharing leadership, if it were 50-50, the other issues would take on a different context." When I talked to her recently, we talked about the prospect of Minnesota finally potentially having a female governor and of the U.S. finally potentially having a female president. We're still asking the same question about what it might be like if we finally had 50-50 representation, but when I talked to her this year, she responded, "It's so easy for all of us to have blinders on and not see from other people's point of view. Women can be just as guilty of that as men. Things change because we have a more diverse base of conversation. So we just have to keep working to make sure that range is at the table. It's not so much whether there are 4 men and 6 women or 6 men and 4 women. That's less important than all of us acknowledging that we have something unique to bring to the conversation." We'll have a little music, and then Marlene will be talking with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be here, and thank you, Mickey, for that, well, some memories I'd almost forgotten about, so I really appreciate that very much. One of the things that she didn't mention, but which is a big part of my life, is that in the early 60s, I started keeping a journal. It was a personal journal, and I initially used it as a way to clarify some serious personal challenges I was having that required clarity and that was elusive and about which I wasn't really comfortable sharing with friends. Over time, I recognized that the process of daily writing also gave me a place to explore ideas and troubleshoot and make a few plans. When Governor Perpich asked me to be his running mate on that fateful day in June of 1982, our first conversation included an acknowledgement that we would be making history. That when we were elected, I recognized that I was making history, And as Minnesota's first woman lieutenant governor and a journal writer, I understood that I had an obligation to keep good records of the work that I would be doing. Earlier in my life, as an entrepreneur, I had been selected by Nina Archibald. Some of you know her. Remember when she became the first woman deputy director of the Minnesota Historical Society, and subsequently became the first female director of the Historical Society. And I still remember that fateful phone call she made to me, and I picked up the phone not knowing who she was, and she had been on the job for a short time and realized that most of the archives collected by the Minnesota Historical Society were of white guys, and most of the white guys were in the railroad business and in the forestry business. What a surprise. And so she decided she wanted to do something about that, and she wrote a grant proposal that would give her the resources to start collecting the archives of Minnesota women. And her idea was that there would be, I'm making this up because I don't remember the details, but Nina is still around, so you can ask her that detail. But something like 6 or 8 young women, like I was at the time, seems hard to believe now, and 6 or 8 who were older, more established people like Ebba Hoffman, who at that time was running the Smead manufacturing company that her husband had started. It was the one that make the manila file folders, remember those? Yeah, the company is still run by a woman, member of that family. At any rate, Nina called and said that she wanted me to be one of those women, and she would send somebody over to educate our little staff of 3 or 4 people about how to keep our records so they would be appropriate for the archives. So we did, and it was a mind-blowing experience for me, because even though I'd been keeping a journal, I really hadn't thought about the fact that my little business was somehow part of history as well. So I actually remember one of these scrapbooks that we gave to the Historical Society, because it was the way we kept track of our original clients, and it was so primitive, but it's there. Anyway, and it was a wonderful experience. So when I became lieutenant governor then, one of the first things I did was ask the staff to call the state archivist to come over and educate my little staff at the lieutenant governor's office about how to keep our archives in good shape so that we would have, good records of the work we were doing. So I had been thinking already when I got to that job about my journal of personal contributions to Minnesota's history. But as often is the case, life has other plans than the ones you start thinking about for yourself. In my case, my political career had an 8-year time span instead of what I had hoped to be would be a 16-year time frame. And my subsequent professional journey through positions in the federal government, a short stint in a small corporation, and then as chief executive officer of an international nonprofit organization, I really had no time or inclination for writing. Then, during the final years of my leadership role at NAFSA, Association of International Educators, my husband Peter fell down a flight of stairs, suffering a permanent brain injury that required him to live the final 9.5 years of his life in a nursing home in Sweden, altering our life as a couple, his life for sure, and mine as well. I became a caregiving spouse with continued responsibility for leading an organization. In early 2020, when I phoned my friend Pauline Boss to let her know that Peter had died Christmas before, she urged me to write the story of those last 10 years. Some of you will know Pauline Boss. She is a very special academic and leader here in Minnesota. She first articulated the concept of ambiguous loss in a path-breaking book by that name. Her second book, Loving Someone Who Has Dementia, has provided extraordinary guidance for thousands of families, myself included. So for several months, following that initial telephone conversation with Pauline, her voice just stayed in my head. As I took long walks in those early days of following Peter's death, while also experiencing the isolation of COVID. Writing this memoir has been a special experience on very many levels. For 50 years, I had held a deep sense that I could not write, and that even though I'd kept a journal for decades, it never occurred to me that I was a writer, because there was feedback from a person, my favorite professor actually at McAllister, my first paper written for him, and the feedback came back and it was in red pencil as they were in those days. Maybe they still are, I don't know. But at any rate, it was in red and the letters were large and it felt really loud and they were harsh. And I absorbed that feedback as though it was the truth. It did not occur to me to fight back. I do not understand that now. I mean, the person I am today, I don't understand how I could actually absorb that and say, go on my life and say, he's telling me the truth. Nevertheless, as I endured the third month of the quiet life we'd all experienced due to COVID, I started writing. I focused initially on those final 10 years with Peter, because those were the journals I had that were the most raw, and they were there. I didn't have to look for them in another box. It included facing the reality that Peter would not return home. It included learning the reality of how to navigate my own role in this new life, how to figure out how to be an advocate for him in Sweden, where he was living. And so I had 50 pages. And I shared those pages with Pauline Boss. Her first response was, I'm writing my third book. I don't have time to do it. I'll speed read 10 pages and I'll give you some feedback about that. So we had lunch in South Minneapolis near her home, and I got on an airplane to go back to Washington. And by the time I woke up the next morning, I had an email from Pauline that said, well, I read all 50 pages because I couldn't put it down. You're a really good writer. And I can feel, as I'm reading that, you're a really good writer and the stories are great, I can feel all that negative stuff that had been carrying around in my body for 50 years just leave. I mean, it's like I'm a different person at the end of that, reading her email to me. But then she said, the problem with what you've written is that it's not enough. In order for this to make sense to a reader, you have to write the whole story. So I said, okay. What else? It's COVID, I have nothing else to do, and now I don't feel so bad about myself, so I can actually enjoy writing, which I actually did. And I mean, I've, at this point, I've listened to so many other memoir writers and read so many things, and I know that many people describe writing as a slog. I can honestly say from that moment on, writing has been a joy. I have just enjoyed it so much, and I still do. So go figure, I don't know. But I've had a few insights as I've written this book, and I have realized, which I had to do because when I first started talking to Eric Anderson, who became my editor at the University of Minnesota Press, he first said to me, I think you have 2 books here. And I said, well, I'm not writing 2 books. We got to figure out a way for this to be 1 book. I think that will be a good thing for me. So, of course, I had to keep thinking about what are the threads here that connect some of this early entrepreneurial and political organizing to a caregiving role toward the end of this story. So there are some threads that came into focus for me. The first one is that leadership can be practiced from whatever position one is in. Early in my life, I chose the path of entrepreneurship, essentially creating a job for myself when other opportunities felt elusive, and in partnership with another woman, identified a niche for us working with nonprofit organizations, because I'd done that before and I realized that nonprofits could use the kind of service that we were talking about offering. At about the same time, I I was anxious to get involved in feminist politics, but I really, I was out of the loop completely. I had not been a party activist. I was a kid, really. And I walked into a meeting of the Minnesota Women's Political Caucus just to, kind of try to get involved. And I walked out a few hours later with an assignment as the new chair of the Minnesota Women's Political Caucus. I was too naive to know that I had just walked into the den, because it was the beginning of the DFL Feminist Caucus being organized and the Republican Feminist Caucus. So there was a quiet understanding among the two organizations that the bipartisan effort would dissolve. But I did not know about that, and I was too naive to think that that was necessary. So I walked out with this new assignment and started more actively appreciating the value of a bipartisan feminist political effort, and moved from there. So I continued running my business at the same time, and I soon recognized in that business that life was a little too lonely. And I had I needed more skills. I was, it's not unusual that we all find we're in a job we're over our head, but in my case, I was really over my head. So I read an article one day in the St. Paul Pioneer Press about Susan Sands, who was an entrepreneur. And within 12 minutes of reading that article, I've tracked her down. Those were the days when you could actually look in a phone book and find somebody. And I don't know how you find phones anymore. But I called her, and a day later, I was sitting in her third floor office in her house on Osceola Avenue in St. Paul. And we became friends, and we talked about organizing other women entrepreneurs, and then we, it went from there. We convinced this new organization in Washington called the National Association of Women Business Owners that they should change their bylaws so they could have chapters, and we would be the first chapter. And that's what happened. 12 years after starting my own business and being involved in organizing women business owners and becoming a national president of that organization, I was in a position of getting the attention of Governor Burbidge. I was candidate, and then I was lieutenant governor, a role with no authority, but lots of opportunities for influence. The leadership I exercised during those 8 years required me to observe and learn and find ways to persuade. Nobody had to listen to me. Later, as CEO of NAFSA, the Association of International Educators, I was where the buck stopped, and I was comfortable making decisions when the situation required that. But at the same time, I quickly understood that being effective in that role as well required building a talented team, a team that supported each other, and I had to support them as well in taking responsibility for their piece of the organization and creating an environment where all of us, every employee and every manager, was being part of the whole picture. Later still, when Peter's fall caused a life-changing brain injury, the trajectory of our life changed forever. Overnight, I was in the role of caregiving and advocacy for a person who could not do that for himself. As others have learned, maybe many in this audience have learned, I was no longer in charge of his care, yet it was up to me to ensure that he had the best possible support each day because he could not speak for himself. When he entered that nursing home, he was the youngest resident, and when he died, he was still the youngest resident. He was the only person in that, among the residents, who could not speak for himself. He couldn't speak at all, and he could make himself understood to the extent that he could disagree or not disagree very clearly, but you had to ask. So that meant that I needed to build constructive and engaging relationships with the management of the nursing home, with each nurse and nurse's aide on his ward, and with the doctor who monitored his health care. I came to understand that for me, this was a whole new way of understanding and conceptualizing leadership. A second theme in my story is that diversity of ideas, a diversity in points of view, and therefore individuals, including women and men, and individuals of a variety of cultural and racial backgrounds, is essential to a well-functioning organization and society. And that accomplishing that requires intentionality. And intentionality is critical in creating an inclusive government, an inclusive organization, a society, or even a network of friends. It's true that most of us spend our lives hanging out with people who look like us, attend the same schools, churches, or other community organizations, and if we believe that diversity of thought, cultural, and economic background or color is important, we must be intentional about making that happen in our personal lives as well as in the organizations we participate in. As I wrote this book, I realized that at every step in my own journey, I had focused on expanding the diversity of the network. From the days of starting the Women Business Owners Association, when we had to postpone our founding meeting because we didn't have enough women of color among our organizing group, to being a participant in the Perpich-Johnson administration, where the governor's stated public goal was to integrate by gender and race every board and commission that he appointed, and to significantly integrate and expand the participation of diverse peoples in the judiciary, to later at NAFSA deciding or committing to having a diverse staff, but also a diverse group of interns. And that meant on the intern level alone that I said we can't have an internship program if we can't pay for it. So we have to figure out how to keep it in the budget. And you can't hire if it's not going to be a diverse group. So I wasn't very popular at the beginning of that, of course, because it's much easier to appoint people and find people who look just like you. It takes a little more effort. But if it's the only way, then people somehow figure out how to do something they thought was impossible the month before. And finally, while I wrote this book, when I was personally ready to write, the timeliness of sharing a book that includes my experiences as the first woman lieutenant governor at a time when our state and country are facing the very real possibilities of having our first woman governor and our first woman president, I've obviously thought further about how my personal experience informs my thoughts about this exciting moment in history. Fortunately, even though I wrote this book at a time when I had no idea that it would be coming out this particular month, I do address an important aspect of this in the book. Because at my very first meeting of the National Association of Lieutenant Governors, I met Martha Griffiths, who at that time was the Lieutenant Governor of Michigan, but previously she had been a member of Congress from Michigan for more than 20 years. And if she had stayed in the Congress, she would have become the first female chair of Appropriations Committee. But she chose to go home because her husband had been very sick, and at the time, in 1982, Jim Blanchard, the candidate for governor, needed a little boost, so he chose Martha as his running mate, and he said publicly more than once that he wouldn't have won that election without her. Well, Martha and I hit it off at our very first meeting and became close friends, and when she heard that I had this incredible access to the governor's time and meetings, he had said to me during our transition period that I had access to any meeting in his office, anytime. I could just walk in. I could look at his schedule, and if I wanted to be at a meeting, I should just be there. It wasn't up to them, it was up to me. And so Martha said to me, you know, your number one job is to be prepared to be governor. You'll do other things, of course, but your most important job is to be ready to be governor. And since you have all this access anyway, and the governor knows what it's like to be lieutenant governor, because he had been one himself at a time in a situation where he had no access to the governor's participation, he wanted his administration to be different. So she said to me, take notes every day. Keep your journal every day. And think about how you would do the work that he's doing. Would you do it differently? Would you do it the same? Would you make the same decisions? Think about who would be in your cabinet if he were to be gone tomorrow. Would you keep everybody? Would you keep a few people? Who would the new people be? Think all the time and update your thinking on a regular basis. I knew it was good advice and I took it. Those journals I can't share them with you because they're in the Historical Society, saved for a while. I don't have to live with them in my own old age. But they will be available to historians. But the point is that the number one job of a person in a number two position is to be ready to be number one. And I believe that both Peggy Flanagan and Kamala Harris have done just that. And I think the way that the campaign is running, even though this is not a political event, I think that I can say without hesitation that Kamala Harris has prepared well in her way, however she's done it. And for those of people who have complained that she hasn't had enough visibility, her job was not to have visibility. Her job has been to be prepared, and she is demonstrating that she has been. During these first few weeks of sharing my book and realizing that I've had such an eclectic variety of experiences, I've thought again about an anthropologist who some of you will know. She was the daughter of Margaret Mead, Catherine Bateson, depending on your point of view. She wrote a book in the 80s called Composing a Life, in which she says that very few women at that point in time, and perhaps even today, have the opportunity to have a linear career. There are a few, but most of us don't. Most of us compose a life from a range of experiences that come our way or that we create for ourselves. And ever since I heard her share that point of view and I read that book in the early 80s, or I guess the 90s, I have reflected on that for myself, and I know that composing a life for me, has been just about the most rewarding way to spend one's time. Thank you very much.
Now that you all have been sitting for a while, stand as you are able and join us in singing hymn number 131 in the gray hymnal, and the words are on the screen.
Really to Good morning, friends. My name is Alan Callender. I've been a member here with my wife for 18 years. And as the current president of the FUS Foundation, I have the honor this morning of presenting the annual Pearson Awards. The foundation is the separately managed arm of the First Unitarian Society that receives donations for the long-term financial management of endowment-type funds. One of these funds is the Pearson Social Concerns Fund, which was established in 1992 by Mibbs and Perry Pearson in honor of their son, Kurt, who was a victim of AIDS and had a passion for social justice and helping others. Kurt's birthday was yesterday, and he would have been 63 yesterday. In that spirit, the Foundation Board has approved the following 3 awards this year. First, a grant of $2,000 to Jewish Community Action to support creation of a progressive, multi-faith, and gender-inclusive coalition with priorities including abortion rights, transgender rights, and passing an inclusive equal rights amendment. This award will help pay stipends for individuals who need support to participate in coalition activities. Secondly, a grant to Scarleteen for operational support of their mission to provide reliable and consistent educational resources about sexualities, relationships, and sexual health in an inclusive and diverse space for young people and adults. Third, a grant of $2,000 to MORE to support additional daily, no-cost English language classes and additional family resources to recent immigrants designed to assist in workplace readiness. And full disclosure here, although I am on the board of directors of MORE, I had absolutely no involvement in the selection process. You will all get a chance to hear directly from the leaders of these 3 organizations in short, informative videos in the coming weeks that will be presented here on Sunday mornings. Finally, I'm way beyond pleased to let you know that we have received an anonymous gift to the Pearson Fund of $150,000. Which more than doubles our fund balance and will allow even greater growth and awards possible for many years, and should be an incentive to help contribute to this fund to make a dramatic statement about our collective efforts here at FUS for social justice. Thank you.
Wow. Good morning. I'm Ann Beecher. I am a member of your Board of Trustees. And what this place means to me, I can't hardly begin to express. A lot of you have heard me say I came here first around 1982. Had the opportunity to move away. I lived in Albuquerque for 30 years, Huntington Beach, California for a few years, Puerto Rico. I'll teach you how to say that later. And then back to California and Palm Springs, but I went to a lot of different spiritual communities in that time. Nothing compares to the First Unitarian Society. Marlene, if I may call you Marlene, your talk this morning was such an inspiration. It really brought a lot of things home to me, so thank you very much. So that's why I determined that this is the place where I spend the bulk of my time, my talent, what there is of it, and my treasure by giving generously. So let me tell you now that First Unitarian Society is a free, independent, self-governing humanist community. Because of the generosity of our members and friends in time, talent, and treasure, we are able to bring our message of justice and hope to the world. You can scan the QR code on the screen, which will take you to our giving page. There you will find several easy ways to contribute to our mission, including a link to our online giving page, as well as a pledge form for planned giving. I highly recommend it. If you are in the building and you want to give by cash or check, you can stop by the office after the service. And thank you so much for helping make our work possible.
right, a few announcements for today. After today's assembly, please join us downstairs for a mini meal menu consisting of chicken pot pie, Bergen glazed carrots, harvest roots and green salad with maple vinaigrette, and cheddar cranberry beer bread. Everyone's welcome to stay for fellowship and food. Right after the service, also join us for some hands-on humanism, making snack bags for MCTC students who are struggling with food insecurity. That'll happen right outside the lower assembly hall. They'll be preparing snack bags with information also about how to vote early or on the day of election. As I mentioned, our guest, Marlene Johnson, will be available for book purchases and signing during the mini meal. And the Chalice Room, 1215, we'll have a little Q&A opportunity with her. Starting on November 1st and on the first Friday into the foreseeable future, you can join Reverend Julin at noon for cookies and conversation. Bring a bag lunch and your questions or conversation topics, and cookies are provided. Finally, the congregational workshops begin this coming weekend. On Friday, the 25th, come to an all-congregation meal and conversation with UUA staff to help launch the work of this interim period that we're in. All ages are welcome, and then next Sunday, there will be a session after the assembly for all of those who identify as leaders from 12:30 to 3 p.m. There's more information and a sign-up link in the Friday update newsletter. Registration will be helpful for those who are planning the meal. Extinguishing the chalice time. All right, Paul. What?
Is there a climate action meeting today? Yes.
Oh, okay. Where is the climate action meeting?
Library.
Library, climate action meeting. In the library right at around 12? Something like that? Okay. All right. George and Rick are on it. Okay, extinguishing the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. All of these we carry in our hearts and in our minds until we are together again. Thank you very much to OK Factor, and thank you very much to Marlene Johnson for being part of today's gathering. As we go out into the world today, this week, and the days leading to the election, be fearless. Ask questions of others and yourself. Hold on to what is good, which includes the support of people here. Do what makes you come alive. As Marlene Johnson has said, we all need people to believe in us, and we all have something unique to bring to the conversation. Rejoice in the power of the human spirit, and we will make it so.